Good morning. This is Andrew Jordan again, and this is a time for another episode of Talking Torah in the book of Bereshit, Genesis. If you like the content that I'm producing, make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel on YouTube, and check out my writing at www.drajordan.com, drajordan.com, where you can find my articles and blog posts about a number of different topics, ranging from the historical Jesus to Gnostic scriptures, the development of Rabbinic Judaism, my commentary on the Gospel of Mark, and much more. Today we're going to continue looking at verse 6 through 8 of Bereshit, the first chapter of Genesis, looking at the translation of the Hebrew text into English, and adding, due to popular demand, a bit of midrashic interpretation of texts. So we start with verse 6. Vayomer Elohim yehi rakia betoch hamayim vihi mabdil ben mayim lamayim. And the JPS, Jewish Publication Society, the most common English version of the Torah in English, translates, God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water." And in this verse, we are introduced to the notions of the type of cosmology that the authors of the Bible were operating under, which is quite different from our own understanding of how things work. And I am not an expert on what the word rakia would have meant. So let's start there and look and see if there's any indication in the notes here about the meaning of the word. And so we can see there are many different ways of translating rakia, expanse, firmament, vault, and it's meant to be this idea of a vault of supporting that's supporting the waters that are above, which they thought there were waters above in the sky, and that's kind of how rain developed and other things like that. So we can look down here and see what we have. We could check and see if there's any other uses of this type of structure in the Torah, in the other parts of the Torah. And we can get some ideas about that. I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let's start with commentary from Rashi and Ibn Ezra. And we'll see here that Rashi is going to talk about the Yehi Rakia, let there be an expanse, which is what is being discussed in this part here. And so he mentions here that the expanse of the vault is fixed because the heavens were created on the first day, but there was still sort of some fluidity to what they looked like. And he's sending us over to a midrash, which is Genesis Rabbah, collection of midrashic statements and interpretations. So let's look down here in the English about what it says here. So they're saying in the name of Rabbi Hanina that, let's see. So when the Holy One, blessed be he, said, "Let there be a firmament, expanse, vault, etc. in the midst of the waters. The middle liquid layer solidified, and the lower heavens were formed, and the heavens above the heavens were formed." So this is explaining a bit of the cosmology of how they understood the sky above them to be functioning. As we said, is much different than what we understand the how the sky works and how these kinds of things occur. And when we have a case like this where modern science contradicts midrashic or agadic statements, there are a number of different approaches as to how to resolve that, so to speak. And I follow the philosophy that modern science is what we are meant to be following, and we're not meant to assume ancient cosmology as something that we need to subscribe to. So let's see if Ibn Ezra has anything to add over here. And he mentioned he's going to refer to Sa'adia Gaon So perhaps it might be better for us to look at Sa'adiagon first, which, if I will remind you, is the translation of the Torah into Arabic. Let's just check the Aramaic, which I think is rather similar, in the midst or the middle, which is basically the same thing. But let's go to the Arabic translation, which here is translated into English. Again, I do not read Arabic, so I don't know how accurate this translation is, but I'm relying on it as the only thing that I have to be able to understand Sa'adiagon's translation. And it says, Allah willed that there should be a layer in the midst of the waters, and that there should be a separation between both waters. So he's calling it a separation, or a layer in the water, in the midst of the water. And that is Sa'adiagon. So now we can understand what Ibn Ezra is saying. So he says that Sa'adia was talking about the firmament, which we were just seeing in the translation into Arabic. And so he says a few things about the firmament. The rakia is something spread out. So you can see that Ibn Ezra is focusing on the cosmological arguments of how this firmament is supposed to be structured, which is interesting, but I think not that important in terms of what it's saying here. I wanted to just point out a few other commentaries that you might find interesting. Seforno can be pretty interesting, who was an Italian rabbi and you should be able to find out information about the commentary. Here it gives you a summary by the 16th century Italian rabbi and physician, and there should be more, but I don't see it here. Or maybe if we open over here, it'll tell us a little more. No, well, that's okay. It's not important, but you can find more information. So he's going to talk about the word rakia, which he translates as, which he says here, guidelines, rules governing what is below and what is above the primordial waters. So he's sort of reading this and explaining it a little more in a way that might be metaphorical, so to speak, that there are guidelines about the earth itself, which makes me think of the laws of nature, basically. So maybe this would be sort of a modern midrashic statement, if you could think of it that way, of how you could understand this text to be referring to something modern. So this could be sort of a very roundabout way of referring to the laws of nature. And I admit that is a bit of a stretch of course, that's not what the text actually means, but if you wanted to find contemporary meaning in that, you could read it that way. So that is that verse. Let's look at the next one really quickly. Vaya'as Elohim et harakia ve'yabdel ben hamayim asher mitachat larakia uben hamayim asher me'al larakia vayhichen. God made the expanse, and it separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above the expanse. And it was so. Let's check our commentaries to see if there's anything here that we should be cognizant of. And I think this is just going to be expanding on the ancient understanding of cosmology, which, as I said, is not something that I'm that fascinated by, to be honest. But let me go here and see Seforno and just see if there's anything interesting here. There was one other commentary that I wanted to show you really quickly, which is down here, and it is Shadal. Where is he? Right here. Okay. Who was also who was a later figure in the 18th century, and who was very opposed to the Reform movement, which was a sort of modernizing movement in Judaism, somewhat similar to mainline Protestantism, if you were to map it on the Christian worldview. Let's see what Shadal has to say about the firmament. And so he is reading this as sort of, so he reads into it, the Holy One, blessed be he, God, wanted to inform Israel that there was neither sun nor anything else controls the rain to bring it down or to bring it up. This could be read as sort of an anti-pagan sort of sentiment, that there was a separation in the understanding of how nature worked. That could be something that could be being meant here. And the last verse here says, "Vayikra Elohim larakia shamayim vayhi erev vayhi boker yom sheni." So God called the expanse sky. There was evening and there was morning, a second day. So let me just check the translations here of Angelos, the canopy, and divided the waters between the canopy. Okay, and here, the canopy heaven. So there's nothing here that is striking me as that different, nor in Arabic. And if you can see on the screen, I have that. So now let me show you how I decided to translate it here in verse 6 and 8. Then God said, "Let a vault in the midst of the water be, so that it may separate between water and water." Then God made the vault and separated the water that is beneath the vault and between the water that is above the vault. And it was so. God called the vault sky. Then there was sunset and sunrise the second day. So I translated expanse, firmament, etc. as vault, relying on one of the meanings of rakia. I translated water as singular, even though in Hebrew it is mayim, which is plural. But you can see that that is a common decision among the translations that we were looking at. And that I have, whenever there's sort of a redundancy in the Hebrew text, I maintain that. So when it says in the second verse here, between the water, you hear a repetition in the English text, which is meant to be there on purpose to maintain some of the literal aspects of the Hebrew language, and also somewhat artificially presenting the English text, in that I explained in a different video that we don't really understand precisely what the different connotations of words meant to the original audience. So I try to keep a word the same. So like the word to separate, I kept it the same word and not using separated and divided or distinguished or etc. So anytime I have the word for separate in Hebrew, I translate as separate in English, even though we probably know there was different connotations and meaning in the original context. But being 3,000 years later, more or less, depending on your interpretation of when things were written, but we don't know exactly what the connotations of the words were in each individual case. We have some understanding based off context and the words around it, but I think by maintaining the same word, the lexical equivalence, I guess you could call it, between different words, you can see this as being a type of different language that's being used, and it is artificial, but that's on purpose. So that is my translation of the Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. If you like this content, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out my writing at www.drajordan.com, drajordan.com. That's all for today. Everybody have a great day.